We are often told that recovery is simply a battle of willpower. But what if the real struggle is not with willpower, but with biology? Let's talk about the physical price of shame.
You've heard this narrative before. It's the idea that addiction is fundamentally a test of character, a question of an individual's will. But that isn't the whole story.
In fact, the science points somewhere else entirely. It reveals a physiological process that actively undermines the very systems in the brain that we need for control. So to really understand why willpower isn't the issue, we have to redefine a central part of this experience: shame. We tend to think of shame as an emotion, or maybe a character flaw. But biologically, it's something very different. It's a form of chronic, inescapable internal stress. You can think of it as a physiological input, one that is processed by the body in the same way as trauma.
So what does this toxic stress actually do to our bodies? Well, let's look at the core systems involved. It all starts with something called the HPA axis. This is the body's master controller for stress. It's the biological switch that determines whether you are in a state of safety or a state of danger. Now, in chronic substance use, this system becomes dysregulated. It gets stuck in the on position, creating a constant state of alarm. This leads to what researchers call the dark side of addiction, a baseline of profound unease or dysphoria, and an inability to feel any pleasure from normal life, which is known as anhedonia. Shame acts as a powerful fuel for this dysregulated system. The brain interprets the internal judgment of shame as a real-world threat. It feeds directly into this already hypersensitive stress system, amplifying the body's state of emergency. Okay, so we have a stress system that's on constant high alert. What does this do to the part of the brain responsible for control? That would be the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. You can think of it as the brain's CEO. It's responsible for rational decision-making, regulating emotions, and inhibitory control. It's the part of the brain that applies the brakes. And here's the critical finding from the research. PFC dysfunction is a consistent finding in chronic substance use, and it's a very strong predictor of relapse. This means the brain's control center is already compromised from the start. This illustrates the core mechanism perfectly. The hyperactive stress system, which is being constantly fueled by shame, floods the prefrontal cortex with emergency signals and stress hormones. This chemical flood functionally impairs the PFC. At times, it essentially takes it offline. You simply cannot be expected to use a control system that is biologically unavailable.
Realizing this allows us to reframe the entire struggle. We can move from a moral lens to a biological one.
And this biological reality is reinforced when we look at the role of genetics. Just consider this number for a moment: 72%. That is the potential genetic heritability for cocaine use disorder. For alcohol use disorder, it's as high as 59%. This isn't about choice, it's about a significant biological predisposition. And when you look at relapse rates, they are right in line with other chronic medical conditions, like type 1 diabetes and hypertension. It's not a moral issue. It's a chronic illness with a biological basis. So let's put all of this together into one clear picture. This is the biological reframe. The common belief says this is a failure of willpower, a test of character. The biological reality, however, is that it's an impaired control system, the PFC, that is battling a hyperactive stress system, the HPA axis. It is a physiological feedback loop, and that loop is amplified by the toxic stress of shame.
Therefore, craving is not a sign of moral failure. It is the logical output of a compromised system.